My name is Erin and I'm the co-owner of a social services agency in St. Paul called Ellie Family Services. And my claim to fame in the work that I enjoy doing is working with families who are experiencing uncoupling, high conflict, and divorce. There are so many aspects of divorce that are important to address. As a therapist, I get to see the many ways divorce impacts families and have learned the 3 most important things you should know to reduce stress and better the outcomes of the divorce process. The 3 most important factors of coping through divorce successfully are learning good and effective communication skills, learning how to show up and be the parents your children need you to be, and taking care of yourself, or as we like to call it in therapy, good self-care. I will be spending the next 15 to 20 minutes teaching you some basics attached to communication, parenting, and self-care to help get you off to the right start. So let's start off with talking about communication. The good news with communication is you've been doing it your whole life. From the time you were born, you communicated using facial expressions, sounds, nothing like the joy screams from a crying baby, and actions to tell others around you what you want. Once you started talking, you learned language, but those nonverbals still stayed with you. Have you ever asked someone what's wrong and they say fine, but you know they aren't because their nonverbals don't match? I'm fine. All of these go together to help us communicate better. And turns out we've learned from research that nonverbals are actually more powerful than the words we speak. Let's break it down just a little bit. There really are 2 kinds of communication. I just kind of previously mentioned verbals and nonverbals. Verbal communication is what we speak. This is spoken in however many languages you know. And we understand each other by the words that come out of our mouth, the words that we write on paper, or whatever surface you're writing on, and the use of sign language. It's using language to communicate. The second kind of communication that we use is nonverbals. This is your tone. An example might be, I'm not mad at what you said, but I'm mad at how you said it. That would be a nonverbal of tone. It includes your body language. You just look so rigid and closed off with your arms crossed. It's your facial expression. So much for a good poker face, right? You gotta be able to mask and keep your face in disguise. And most importantly, it's your eye contact. We can tell how people are feeling about us, just whether or not they're willing to connect with our eyes or not. When communicating, it's really important to be aware of both how you're showing up with your verbals and nonverbals. When talking to people you work with or the worker at Chipotle, all the way to your kids and even your ex-spouse, it's important to be aware of how you are showing up in those conversations. The reason why our verbals and nonverbals may not match is because different parts of the brain are at work. We have 3 parts of our brain that help us communicate. When they aren't in sync, we might have mismatched communications, kind of like that "how are you doing, I'm fine" example, where you're just like, that body language doesn't match with what you're saying. You can get more information in my free divorce basics presentation attached with the webinar on the areas of the brain and communication. But to keep it simple, it's important to do your best to be aware of how you are communicating your verbals and nonverbals. This is a leading cause of conflict when people are navigating through the divorce process. The best way to communicate with your soon-to-be ex-spouse, and perhaps even your children, when you aren't able to be as open as you want, is to use skills that best align your verbals and nonverbals. Bill Eddy, the author of the book Biff, helps us identify the best ways. The book Biff outlines 4 ways to communicate and keep us from saying words or communicating nonverbals that can escalate a conversation. I'm going to go over his BIFF acronym to help you take skills away from this webinar to immediately use when communicating with your spouse. The first one is to be brief. The idea behind being brief is to not overdo it. No need to beef up a conversation just because. The next one is be informative. Focus on the facts and be super intentional about what you are trying to say. Be friendly. This is one that can bottom out often when we're dealing with high conflict conversations. But remember to smile. Attempt to be as warm as possible. If you think you can be friendly, you will be. The power of positive thinking. And be firm. Say what you need to say and have a very clear message. In closure and talking about communication, there's a couple other things to note. Be aware of how you show up by paying attention to your verbals and nonverbals. That's the first step to achieving good communication. Using skills from Biff will naturally help you smooth out some dysfunctional communication patterns that may have even been present to your marriage or have led to where you are right now, which is thinking about or getting a divorce. Remember that during divorce, even though feelings run high, if you're able to focus on the changes ahead and using good communication skills to get through it, you will set yourself up for greater success and continue to be a great role model to your children. The next important factor is being a good parent or co-parent. A lot of people who get divorced struggle immensely with co-parenting. Meanwhile, others have never had a problem in this area. The most important thing to note is that whatever side of good or bad co-parenting you fall on when married, it will change during and after your divorce. Expect change. This particular area is my expertise. Co-parenting is not the idea that parents can continue to use the same joint parenting skills as when they were married. It's the idea that they can learn how to parent together while living separate lives. This is also the greatest adjustment for your child. The distinction is important so that all parents understand that there is a big learning curve, except that it's not a very intuitive feeling, and it can come with a lot of complications and definitely shouldn't just be ignored. Let's dive into a few more of the details on how you can show up as a good co-parent. Parents need to be reminded that divorce does not have to be a huge traumatic event for your kids, just because it is for you. Don't assume that every big feeling that they have is because of your divorce. What research tells us is that the hardest part of divorce for kids is not actually the parental separation. It's the conflict and then moving, so kids having 2 homes instead of 1. Parents get to have power over how conflictual their divorce is, regardless of the circumstances that led to the divorce. And they also have power over moving and keeping that as positive as possible. Keeping that in mind, you as the parent have 100% power of how you show up. I always tell parents to take the negative energy that they have towards their co-parent and reframe it and use it for success. If co-parenting is going to fail, let it be the other parent's fault. This means that you keep being the best co-parent and parent you can be, and if it's failing, you will always have peace of mind that you continue to do your best, even at your worst. Your kids deserve at least that through this process. Notice that I often use the word power. The reason is pretty simple. Control is an illusion that we often mistaken for power. Let me elaborate. Control is the idea that we can influence or manipulate anything we want whenever we want, and that simply isn't true. My belief is that control lives with the fairies and the unicorns of the world. Conceptually, they make sense, we wish we had them, and it sounds pretty cool. But the reality is they just don't exist. We do have power though, and with power we have the ability to use it for good or bad. Think dictatorship versus democracy here. No evil villains of our past, real or make-believe, ever had control, but they did have power and they used it for bad. Remember what I said about nonverbals too. If you use your power for bad, even if you verbally communicate for good, your children will learn the bad because nonverbals are more powerful. Think monkey see, monkey do here. Another thing you need to remember, as much as you might not be very happy with your spouse or soon-to-be ex-spouse, your kids first identify themselves as half of each of you, whether they're your biological children or not. They know you as their parents. If you are cruel and unkind to your co-parent through your divorce, you are also injuring the part of your child who is half your spouse. Another really big factor to note is this idea or concept of family. You need to remember that regardless of what happens, the message needs to be that you're always family. I don't care if you think you're not, just because you get divorced and live separate lives, you still are, and your kids need to know and hear that message. Kids need to know that parents can fall out of love and remarry and move on with their lives, but what they can't ever believe is that we can divorce our family. Kids worry if their parents can leave each other, it means that they could leave them. Even though you tell them 1,000,000 times, there's a little piece in their survival brain that gets worried it too could happen to them. Hence this being somewhat traumatic for your kids. If you are able to focus on the idea that you will always be a family, they won't need to worry if you ever leave them. Period. End. The most important thing to note is that there are tons and tons of resources out there. There are workshops, trainings, books, therapists, etc. Even if nothing resonates with you, pick up a book on co-parenting and learn something about how you can better help your kids through your divorce. It can be pretty therapeutic for you too. While emotions are high, it can be difficult to get this all done. Remember, you aren't perfect and you will slip up. It's okay to slip up. Own it, apologize, and do better next time. If it's habitual, see a therapist. In my super biased opinion, it really helps. This leads me to our last topic for today, which is self-care. Self-care is the idea that we take care of ourselves. It's a pretty easy concept. Easy to understand, hard to execute. I saw a cute little Facebook picture that described it perfectly. You can't pour from an empty cup. This means that if we have nothing to give. If you want to be your best self, your best parent, your best employee, your best partner, you need to take time for yourself. Divorce is a major change up to our life and routine. We have to conceptually understand that and behaviorally understand that too. It's important to remember that you don't have an internal compass that points you due north, and allow yourself to learn as you go and seek help along the way, whether that's from family, friends, and of course, a therapist. Divorce forces change to your finances, your career, your emotional health, your mental health, your identity, physical health, relationships, behavior. I mean, the list goes on. And so the most important thing you can do is find some balance and make sure you're taking care of yourself. Don't prove to be the PTA soccer does-it-all mom at the expense of not sleeping. Take a class, go to therapy, hit the gym, meet with a financial expert, make some new friends. One of the best things you can do is set goals for yourself throughout your divorce. This can help you stay on track for the things that are important to you while you go through this really major and sometimes painful life transition. Sometimes the conflict and change brings us to a place that we never wanted to be in. So have goals, reflect on them often, and work your tail off to try and achieve them. You'll thank yourself when you've settled into the new version of your life. The 3 major takeaways from today are to remember to focus on good communication skills, co-parenting, and taking really great care of yourself. For more information, consider reaching out to a therapist. There's several that you can find in your community who might just be the perfect person to talk to through this process. In addition, check out the Second Saturday workshops and website.